World of Warcraft is an MMORPG and the most successful of its kind, clocking in an outrageous almost 20 years of life at the time of making this video. I, like many others, started playing WoW at launch in 2005 and was immediately hooked. Even now in 2023 there are people out there reliving their experiences all over again in Classic. This video isn't to document the rise and supposed fall of World of Warcraft, but to voice my feelings and opinions that a new player may struggle with when leveling throughout the game. Despite Blizzard's attempt at the Shadowlands revamp, the leveling experience is still extremely difficult to wrap your head around when it comes to the story, and to me, doesn't feel like a complete or satisfying experience. Whilst I think the introduction to the Starting Zone Exile's Reach was a good change, and really sets the tone for modern WoW, teaching you your rotation, treasure hunting, rare mobs, and a little introduction to dungeons, it's important to see the rest of the leveling journey through the eyes of a new player who is focused on the story. I'll use an example from the Alliance point of view here. A new player would finish Exile's Reach, receive a summons to Stormwind City, and before they know it, they are thrusted into the Battle for Azeroth expansion. As you set off to the Isle of Cortyrus with Lady Jaina Proudmoore, who you've had no introduction with whatsoever by the way, you're then thrown into the dark cold cells of Tol Dagor, with no real backstory as to why this is even happening. And this is just the beginning. Whenever I hear about new players in World of Warcraft, they often say the same thing. They feel late to the party or have missed the boat. A new player experience must feel like they've started the most talked about current TV show, but were forced to begin at Season 5, or skipping to the last chapter of a book. Features and systems in WoW often slip into irrelevancy or futility, because they were incentivized by power or were simply a theme for an expansion, rather than something that is evergreen and could move forward with the game. You can still go back and claim all of the rewards and the achievements, whether that be island expeditions, warfronts, Torghast, horrific visions, garrisons, whatever it is you're looking for. But you can't ever capture that authentic experience. The game suffers a lot from this, and maybe you don't need to see everything in its purest form. Playing through an expansion story and facing off with the main villain when you're trying to understand what is happening is crucial, and this is what I want to talk about today. I wanted to do a bit of research into this and see how a new player would take to the game. I came across a Final Fantasy XIV player named Syncweaver who had documented his new player journey into WoW. He notes pretty early in that his character is referred to as the Champion. This confuses him, as from his point of view, he's only just started. He hasn't done anything yet. He rolled a Death Knight, freeing himself from the Lich King's domination, and then was immediately summoned to Anduin, the King of Stormwind, and one of the leaders of the Alliance. 3 minutes ago his character was being pelted by fruit in the streets, and the next thing he knows he's being hailed as the Champion.
Champion!
He felt he had to ask for outside help for a summary as to what was going on in the story. Syncweaver also explained that as a new player it was impossible to use Chromie Time to see the previous expansions authentically. Chromie Time is a system that was implemented to allow people to level new characters in an expansion or timeline of their choosing. From the Burning Crusade to the Shadowlands, the choice is yours. However, brand new players to the game still have to begin in the aforementioned Battle for Azeroth expansion, as Blizzard feel this is the best leveling experience. Syncweaver goes on to state that his WoW experience felt like the game emphasised reaching endgame, rather than telling a solid story. Similarly to what I had mentioned, he likened his experience to attending Hogwarts at Year 6, or watching The Lord of the Rings at Movie 3 1 hour in. I'll leave a link in the description below to Syncweaver's video if you want to check out his full WoW experience. I understand there are a great deal of people out there who aren't interested in the story, or it isn't their primary focus, and that's totally fine. I can't imagine everybody reads every questlog they've ever picked up. That being said, there are a lot of fun side quests and stories out there. The Legend of Stalvin, Morladim, Welcome to the Machine, and The Day That Deathwind Came always come to mind for me. Or maybe it's the map still seared into my brain after all these years. But there are people out there who are going to gorge on lore no matter what it is, whether it's the Defias Brotherhood, Queen Ajara, the Old Gods, the Lich King, or even Millhouse Manostorm. People are curious and they want to learn. I thought about this for years as friends of mine would try and progress through the game, but with no experience in editing and a host of anxiety issues, I was never going to make a video on it. However, Taliesin did, and he hit the nail on the head with his brilliant Path of the Curator idea, and that was over 3 years ago now, and World of Warcraft is still no better for newcomers. It's a perfect system on what Blizzard need to do to make a more authentic and complete leveling experience. The link's in the description below, which I recommend you check out. It's a very good watch. Let's use Wrath of the Lich King as an example to discuss the main issue. Wrath of the Lich King. The glory days. Peak World of Warcraft, they'll tell you. 12.5 million subscribers, they'll tell you. If a player creates a character and thinks, I quite fancy seeing what's going on in Northrend and learning about the most iconic villain in Warcraft history, the Lich King. They'll begin their journey, From Borean tundra or howling fjord to the cold depths of Icecrown, they will ally with the Argent Crusade and the Ebon Blade. But when all is said and done, will they actually defeat the big bad himself? The answer is, well, no. They will encounter Arthas throughout their journey, and they will learn more about him as they progress throughout their campaign in Northrend. But there is something terribly dissatisfying about seeing the iconic Wrathgate cinematic and this dramatic build-up, and then you hit level 50 and you're immediately kicked out of Chromie Time, teleported to Stormwind Orgrimmar, and pushed into the newer content. This story you had invested yourself into is just over now. So you haven't actually dealt with the Lich King, have you? And that's a huge problem in my opinion. If there's no culmination in the story, then it's simply a means to an end. There's no emotional or narrative payoff. The only takeaway from this is that you were gated by an expansion story just to now be able to get to where Blizzard want you to be. You can apply this to Deathwing in Cataclysm, or Argus in Legion, or any expansion. This is a narrative nightmare. It doesn't make sense to participate or invest yourself in these stories just to turn around and say, sorry Tyrion, I know we said we were going to do the thing at the place, but Rathian's just said that he's found the Dragon Isles, see ya. And it doesn't need to be like that. Prior to Chromie Time, you would level at such a rapid pace with heirlooms and the Dungeon Finder that you wouldn't even be able to experience all of Northrend zones. Even if Blizzard have eliminated that problem now, the grand finale is still incomplete. Taliesin discusses a new player playing through BFA for the first time, progressing the story so they can be ready for Shadowlands. But just because they've finished all the quests in Drustvar, Tirigard Sound and Stormsong Valley, is that a complete and authentic experience? He goes on to state that they wouldn't have seen Mechagon, Nazjatar or Queen Azshara, or the journey of Sylvanas and the path she's going down on the road into Shadowlands, and as a major character in the Shadowlands expansion, it's simply never going to make any sense for a new player. They likely never did the war campaign, they never fought N'Zoth, let alone knew who he was or the history of the old gods. What does a newcomer exactly take away from the BFA story? It wouldn't be a World of Warcraft video these days without some sort of Final Fantasy XIV comparison, and the storyline in Final Fantasy XIV is masterful, with key moments and battles taking place in something called Trials, which are 8-man boss encounters, and important events also being played out through solo duties, which are part of the main scenario quests, the MSQ. When I first decided to give Final Fantasy XIV a try, I had the mentality some WoW players may have, of just skipping the cutscenes and blasting my way to max level. Initially, I was only interested in seeing how the endgame differed from WoW. I ended up totally regretting it, as I found a group to raid with but didn't understand what was happening, or know who the bosses were that we were encountering. All of my friends were getting really hyped, and I felt left out. I ended up making a new character to play through the entire story, and absolutely loved it. I think another option for World of Warcraft would be to introduce the minimum item level option when entering a dungeon or raid. Minimum item level in Final Fantasy XIV is designed to sync your character and gear to that content and level. This could give players a chance to party up and potentially see raids as they were back then. Imagine the fated season that we saw in Shadowlands, and will again in Dragonflight, and apply that to something like Icecrown Citadel, or dare I say it Dragon Soul. Although with constant stat and level squishes, this could prove complicating. Perhaps this is food for thought to expand time walking and make that more relevant. But I think World of Warcraft could take a page out of Final Fantasy XIV's book with both trials and duties. Players should see, live and breathe Wrath of the Lich King, or the expansion of their choosing in its entirety. And when all is said and done and you finish questing in the final zone, you get that showdown with the big bad. And it doesn't have to be something you can queue with players. Raids could have an optional story version instance, a solo dungeon, of you ascending to the top of the Frozen Throne with a party that is relevant to the raid and the story. In this case, Icecrown Citadel, featuring the likes of Tyrion Fordring, Varian, Garrosh, Sylvanas, and so on. You queue for this story dungeon, which features trash and maybe a boss or two. You eventually make it to the top, and fade to black. A cutscene starts to play, and then you and the other NPCs, who would have set roles that would be adjustable depending on your role, for example Varian a tank and Tyrion a healer, overcome the antagonist of the expansion. These don't have to be incredibly challenging or mechanically excessive encounters, but this should serve as the final word in this story's arc. This could also be applied to raids of equal importance in other expansions, such as the Nighthold with Gul'dan and Tomb of Sargeras with Kil'jaeden. Perhaps NPCs could illustrate what is happening as the story continues to unfold, with appropriate dialogue that then features the raid-ending cinematics, like Illidan disenchanting Gul'dan, just so you feel you have some grasp on what is happening. I feel like Legion is trickier with Suramar, the Broken Shore and Argus being max level zones rather than leveling zones. These could now be adjusted and baked into the main storyline for Legion, with less important quests being removed in other zones, as opposed to some max level post content that you would simply ignore when you were told to move on to the next expansion. This would allow you to continue to quest in Suramar, the Broken Shore, and Argus, and still be gaining experience. By the time you have dealt with Argus in this brand new story dungeon, you're now level 60 and ready to take flight into the Dragon Isles. I would expect if this was ever to happen, it would all be optional, as not everybody would be interested or happy about having to do solo events or story dungeons, and I get that, but having this option would be great for people who are interested. It's of course possible and entirely valid to play the game your way and on your terms. You don't have to participate in Chromie Time if you don't want to. You can run around and quest in whichever zone you like, in whichever continent you like. I'm guilty of often doing my holy trinity of Westfall, Redridge Mountains and Duskwood. You can sit in a major city and spam dungeons to your heart's content if that's your preferred method of leveling, but Chromie Time offers an opportunity for new players to see a specific timeline for what it is, and right now, it feels like such a waste. New players are curious to learn about the game and the story, and at the end of the day, they have almost 20 years of content and lore to sink their teeth into. Blizzard needs to try and acknowledge this. I'm not a game developer, so I couldn't even begin to imagine how much work it would take to do this, but we know they're capable of doing it thanks to the mini-dungeon you participate in during the ending of Exile's Reach. This is without doubt a big undertaking for what Blizzard would almost certainly consider to be a waste of time and resources, but it would enrich players' experiences significantly, and most importantly, for the rest of WoW's life. Because this will always be an issue. No matter what direction they choose to take the story in the future, eventually it will come to a head and it will mesh with lore and stories that have already been established. An example Bellular and Matt used was if Yrel suddenly comes parading into the Eastern Kingdoms or Kalimdor, as difficult and messy Waters of Draenor is to understand, people would still be clueless as to what is happening, who she is, and what her motivations are. World of Warcraft should be focusing on more things than just how fast somebody can level, endgame, and power gains. If there's one thing that Final Fantasy XIV has shown me is that I care more about a story being told well than just getting my next upgrade or best in slot. And that's not to say WoW's storytelling is bad, because it isn't, for the most part, but it's very confusing and disjointed for a new player. Chromie Time is a great idea, but it should be about playing and experiencing the story and what happened during that period of time, not just playing through your favourite zones, unless that's what you want to do. I feel that Blizzard have been looking through the same lens for the longest time now, and that is simply catering to the player base they already have, rather than welcoming new adventurers into the fray. I believe that player retention in Dragonflight is considerably higher than Shadowlands, but Blizzard must try and expand its player base by bringing in new blood, rather than just trying to win their old players back. I think Dragonflight is a good expansion. I enjoyed the zones thoroughly, I loved the Blue Dragon aspect storyline, dragon riding is great fun. I think the leveling experience in Dragonflight is the best an expansion has ever offered personally. But I think where Dragonflight falls short is the removal of the chores and borrowed power that people have been bending over backwards for since Legion. And I'm not advocating for borrowed power to come back, but when you remove something, for better or worse, so core to the endgame, I think it really exposed WoW and showed that Dragonflight had little content to offer players outside the trifecta of Mythic Plus raids and PvP. People want reasons to log in. This is magnified when you return to the aforementioned systems that have been long abandoned, such as Torghast, Islands, and so on. Most WoW veterans who left may not be easily swayed to return either, as they have felt so burned from BFA and Shadowlands. I think if Blizzard can continue to undo the damage that those expansions caused and regain players' trust, I think the future can be bright for WoW. Speaking of the future, Blizzard have announced their next 3 expansions at BlizzCon titled The World Souls Saga. It's brave, it's outlandish, and it's honestly impressive. I thought the cinematic was incredible. I know not everybody is into the storytelling WoW offers, and some just want to play the game, and that's fine. But for me, and I'm sure many others, this is a massive win. I think the introduction of something like warbands proves that World of Warcraft is here to stay and is simply evolving once more. But my concern remains with new players wanting to give this a try. Similarly to what I had mentioned before, if a new player decides they want to jump in and are immediately rushed into Dragonflight now, or even the War Within, they don't exactly have any context as to what is happening, and that will desperately need addressing. They won't know who the dragon aspects are, they won't know who Anduin is or why he's struggling so much and is now severed from the light. If they started in Dragonflight, they would have played a story without even seeing him as it stands. They won't know who Thrall or Illyria are, and they certainly won't know why a giant sword is plunged into Silithus.
And Sargeras, as you know, stabbed the earth with a sword, and it's been there for quite a while, and I'm not really sure like where things are going with that.
Wait, what? What sword?
It's all good and well for the veterans who remember Anduin as the young boy in Stormwind Keep and have watched him grow up into the man he is today. Why should a new player care about him? I feel that it won't make a good storytelling experience for newcomers. The preface of these expansions are, it's time to come home. But where is home for a new player? Executive producer for World of Warcraft Holly Longdale said in an interview that the team took inspiration with the World Soul saga from the likes of Disney and the MCU, Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is cool. But as somebody who only watched all of the Marvel films in the last 2 years, I found it incredibly overbearing having to dive into 21 films just to be able to understand Endgame. You can't just watch some Marvel films on a whim, because these films are so expertly woven in with everything else that's been happening to bridge the entire story arc. And I feel the same applies to World of Warcraft storytelling. Where is the actual starting point to learn the story for World of Warcraft? What is World of Warcraft's Iron Man? Another thing I find so confusing with the storytelling is the characters can be so distant and forgettable, and are often promoted for expansions rather than a constance in the story. For example, Khadgar in Warlords and Legion, Jaina in BFA, Bolvar in Shadowlands, and now the dragon aspect in Dragonflight. Anduin and Sylvanas have obviously taken a backseat now after Shadowlands 2. If we are threatened with a world-ending villain, surely we would call upon everybody we've allied with in the past. The likes of Khadgar, Bolvar, Turalyon, Velen, Malfurion, Tyrande, Jaina, Thrall, Rathian, the dragon aspects. Some characters feel like they were conceived purely for the telling of an expansion and then become totally written off, like Talanji for instance. I also thought Talia had a lot of potential. Why are characters so isolated from the story, or only called upon for certain narratives? New players will see returning characters and be clueless as to who they are. I'm sure we're all excited and expecting to see the return of Illidan Stormrage again in the World Soul saga at some point, and most people know who Illidan is, even people who don't play the game. He's like the Lich King, he's just that iconic. But they won't know anything about him, or where he's been all this time. I think one of Blizzard's biggest failings is tying features, systems, and even characters to expansions, and then sometimes watching all three fade into obscurity. To reference Final Fantasy XIV again, it's like an arrow, it's straight and true. There is a clear beginning, a middle, and an end in each expansion, and the content you engage with has purpose and meaning. At the very start of Final Fantasy XIV, depending on whether you were there to witness the destruction of 1.0 or started in 2.0 onwards, the way NPCs would address you is a bit different. If you were there before the Calamity and reset with A Realm Reborn, the NPCs will remember you, and the dialogue may be different to somebody who started in or after A Realm Reborn, and that sometimes still happens today in the latest expansion. These moments are rare, but I think are so cool. Even in the latest patch of Endwalker there was a small difference, and that is based on if you've done the Shadowbringers raid series or not, with a cameo from a certain NPC. It's a small thing that doesn't alter the story, but it feels good to be acknowledged for feats you have actually done. World of Warcraft will just give your character credit and reference things you haven't even seen or done. The game automatically assumes you know what is going on. There is just such a profound disconnect with the storyline and your character. You are the champion of Azeroth, the slayer of the Lich King, Deathwing, and many more, without ever even seeing them. I spoke with Nobbel, who has served as a beacon for the lore and storytelling of Warcraft, and he had the following to say. A problem with the story of Warcraft is that it builds upon what came before, regardless of opinions on those expansions and stories, while at the same time wanting players to join everyone else at endgame as quickly as possible. The next shiny expansion is where all the new players are hanging out, and their design philosophy is to have new players catch up as quickly as they can. That's a benefit compared to having to sell the idea that new players will have to go through everything that came before, which is quite the time investment, and some will be of higher quality than others. He references the struggles some players have with A Realm Reborn in Final Fantasy, saying that it'll be totally worth it if you can just get through that. The negative is that it comes at the cost of experiencing the story as it was told in the game. Classic has been completely revamped into the Cataclysm. Certain patches or moments like the Battle for the Undercity or Darkspear Rebellion are out of the game. Leveling is so fast that you blast through the zones before getting a grasp on what's going on, so there's no means for a player to figure out what came before. This is where channels like myself come in, but it shouldn't be that way. People should be able to figure out in-game what the story of Anduin is, especially since it's going to be playing such a big part for the future. In regards to the latest announcement cinematic, a lot of people weren't around anymore during the Shadowlands and didn't even get to experience the moment Anduin flashes back to. This makes it hard for them to connect to the deep story behind it. A solution could be something like a museum or codex in the game. I just always get the impression that Blizzard are not thinking enough about new player experiences. That being said, I'm super excited about the World Soul Saga, and I really hope it captures the magic that WoW was known for so long. I think 3 expansions is very risky, but I'm here for it. It's good that they have a plan and a vision, because BFA and Shadowlands was such a disjointed mess narratively, either not finishing or telling multiple stories, which sometimes didn't have a clear conclusion or make sense. Even having the likes of Nobbel, who is considered by many to be an expert in this field, or somebody like Pyromancer, whose area is more speculation, coming up with theories as to how events could unfold. Even Shadowlands put them in a state of confusion, because intent versus product delivered was such a mess.
So Sylvanas floats off into the next expansion, proclaiming, "When next you see me, you will understand." Spoiler alerts, my dear viewer, you will not understand. You will fuck all understand anything in Shadowlands, because nobody explains anything.
The most common outcry is, I just want to know what's going on. And sometimes that even applies to veteran players. For many years now, a lot of the story is contained via comics, novels, or even other games, and is so utterly disconnected from the MMORPG. As somebody who jumped over to Final Fantasy XIV some years ago now, I can't explain how exhilarating and satisfying it was to have a story that was told so wonderfully. Everything made sense, it moved with purpose, and I became so emotionally invested. It wasn't about the destination, it was about the journey. And I wish WoW had better execution to make people feel this way too. New players feel lost and confused because the game relies too much on players already knowing the established lore. 9 expansions and multiple patches worth of content is too much to expect for a new player to grasp, and it would take far too long to level in the style of the MSQ format like Final Fantasy XIV. And that's why new players are where they are now, stranded, in a modern day expansion with no clue what's happening or who's who. A suggestion for Blizzard would be trying to summarise or catch players up in the story. I don't think everything ever needs to be explained, but players should know who they are journeying with in this new content, and a bit of backstory on them. I think something comparable to the unending journey cutscene viewer in Final Fantasy XIV would be nice, or perhaps even an in-game library or Wikipedia of sorts, which could showcase a detailed history of a character or a zone. In BlizzCon's latest Q&A regarding the War Within, Associate Game Director Morgan Day mentioned that in a future update for Dragonflight, there'd be a feature called Azerothian Archives, which could be helpful for people to learn more about the history of the characters in the game. Here's hoping. As well as Azerothian Archives, patch 10.2.5 of Dragonflight titled Seeds of Renewal will introduce something promising for new players called Follower Dungeons. Similarly to Squadrons or the Trust system as in Final Fantasy XIV, Follower Dungeons will allow players to solo queue into dungeons with AI, allowing them to enjoy and explore dungeons at their own pace, and also to tie up the remaining quest lines and story in zones, as the dungeon quests aren't mandatory but do serve as the finale of that zone. This will be a welcome change for newcomers who are a bit hesitant about jumping into a dungeon with little experience, and also gives players the opportunity to try out different roles, such as tanking or healing. You'll only be able to queue for follower dungeons in Dragonflight as it stands, but no doubt this will be a feature regardless of expansion in the near future. Full copium, but maybe the solo raid instance can happen. Furthermore, Blizzard recently announced their Warcraft roadmap, a timeline leading up to the War Within, and it features something in patch 10.2.7 named Timerunning Pandemonium. Mr. GM tweeted about data mining on Wowhead titled Pandaria Time Walking Season, which could possibly relate to a potential replay of the storyline of Mists of Pandaria. I mentioned food for thought on time walking a bit earlier in the video, and I find this really interesting. But isn't this supposed to be the purpose of Chromie Time? To be able to replay stories from years gone by? This sounds really promising all the same, and I'm excited to see what this is. Despite these issues, I'm not sure if World of Warcraft needs to be rebooted or a realm reborn, and it's definitely not beyond saving. WoW 2, in my opinion, is better the devil you know. I can understand when people such as Asmongold say things like, there's too much in the game. Whether it's spells, mounts, zones, pets, systems, titles, you name it. And he's obviously not wrong. But we have to acknowledge the sunk cost fallacy. Our characters are our body of work in a sense. This is a very negative and cynical way of thinking, and I'm not sure if anybody else feels this way, but stay with me. I often felt during the bad times, or whenever WoW struggled, that I was almost a prisoner to it. That's not to say I still didn't have fun at times, despite people's opinions of Warlords, BFA and Shadowlands. But I felt compelled to play it, and stick around, even after all of my friends had moved on, because of all the time I've put into my character, and of course my love for the game. And the amount of time and effort we've put into our characters means something. When you've farmed so many mounts, titles, reputations, achievement points, you feel a great sense of satisfaction, and you should. If we remove all of this and reboot World of Warcraft, what is the incentive to stick around if it struggles? I think Blizzard have too much to lose by rebooting the game, and they know that. It could be a hit, and it could also spell the end. The important thing is that Blizzard look at all aspects of their game, providing fun, evergreen content for players moving forward, and also providing clarity to new players who are about to start their journey. In my chat with Nobbel discussing both WoW's story philosophy and Final Fantasy XIV, he said, "It's an interesting thing to consider, especially when we look at where we started in the story of Warcraft. We didn't start out as the Warrior of Light, for example. Instead, we were random adventurers that showed up to help, if we were even given that credit. Sometimes we would, lore-wise, be written out and the story would be given to a main character, like a king who claimed the dragon's head, instead of my guild and raid team. There's a lot to be said about both options, and it comes down to personal preference. Personally, I like it better as a background character, because becoming the main character offers problems. You mentioned that new players are expected to have experienced all of these moments before. At the same time, how special is it to be the High Lord of the Paladins, when everyone else is the High Lord? I'll never forget how they gave me that title and cutscene, only for another player to spawn in behind me and do the exact same thing. When everybody is special, no one is. On top of that, while our enemies grow bigger and larger and so does our fame, we're still asked to do simple tasks. Hey true Moorwalker, can you go and pick me some flowers? There's an argument to be made about staying humble and still performing small tasks, but it's definitely a switch in tone. Personally, I prefer it to be recognised as an adventurer, perhaps sometimes get some special treatment. Back in Wrath, they allowed you to skip the line of new sign-ups because they knew you. That was cool. I like those smaller things. Some people expect the recognition and want to be placed in a more prominent role, while others much prefer to be an adventurer in the background and have the story unfold around the main characters. He goes on to state that anything is possible, and going back retroactively to fix the game would be amazing, but thinks it would be too big of a project and wish, suggesting instead they put that effort into gathering what has come so far and present it in such a way that a player in-game can easily learn what's going on. He says to imagine a museum, where you can rewatch the old cutscenes, old heroes show up to tell their side of the story, scenarios, theatre play. Then while adventuring and reading quests, you could click on certain keywords and a codex would open up, offering you details on the current subject. You could have it sorted by time period if it's a character that plays a part in multiple expansions, like Anduin or Sylvanas. Then you can dive into how the story is presented. He describes immersion as a wonderful add-on which they could use to transform the way quests are presented. But what do you think? Am I being too critical of the leveling experience? Do you think that it's possible to fix the storytelling for a newcomer at this point? Or do you think that new players should just roll their sleeves up and get learning the old-fashioned way if they care enough? Let me know in the comments below. This is my first ever video, so I understand the quality isn't going to be great, and if you made it to the end, then I thank you and appreciate you very much. I hope my love and passion for the game and franchise shines through on this video, because I'm not looking for an excuse to dunk on WoW. I love WoW, and I want it to be the best it can possibly be. I just want the storytelling to be something people can appreciate, understand, and look forward to. Another reminder that the links are in the description below if you want to check out some of the people that I've referenced today. Thank you to Nobbel for your insight and wisdom. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Please consider liking and subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one.